Hi, Tamar. I know we already answered the first three questions on the homework, starting with the information on page 1, but I'm going to read the whole thing to you anyways, just so you have it for reference and for myself to practice. So I'm on page 1 of Explore of 3.1 Geography of Mesopotamia on discoveryeducation.com. Scrolling down, many families can trace their histories back to foreign countries or ancient lands. Do you know anyone who can trace his or her roots all the way back to Mesopotamia? The most likely answer is no. That is because Mesopotamia was one of the earliest centers of human civilization. Some of the first cities in the world were found there. It would be nearly impossible for most people to trace their origins back to Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia was established in ancient Iraq around 3500 BCE, about 5,500 years ago. Nomadic peoples migrated from place to place in search of food. Eventually, some of these nomads settled in the area between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, where modern Iraq and part of eastern Syria are now located. Historians and archaeologists call this region Mesopotamia, which means the land between rivers, Meso meaning between, and Potamia meaning rivers. Several ancient civilizations sprang up in this region. Let's get a picture of what this region looks like real quick. So we scroll down here. Over on this side, this is Africa. Up here is Europe. Over here is Asia. This is called the Arabian Peninsula, the Persian Gulf, and you have the Euphrates and Tigris rivers in what's called the Fertile Crescent. Mesopotamia was not a country in the same way the United States and other modern nations are. It did not have the same kind of political borders that we have today. Instead, it was a civilization made of separate settlements or cities, sometimes referred to as city-states. City-states consisted of large cities and the surrounding areas. So think New York City, all of the surrounding area around it would be part of that city-state if it was a city-state. So we would probably technically be in New York City's city-state. Each city-state was usually controlled by a strong ruler. At different points in history, different empires ruled these cities. Page 2, Big Cities. Where were Mesopotamia's major cities located? And remember, this helps us with question 2 on this side. Discuss what each of Mesopotamia's 3 major cities were like: Eridu, Ur, and Uruk. How do we know about the cities that existed thousands of years ago? In the early 1900s, several archaeological excavations uncovered Eridu, Ur, and Uruk, 3 major cities of ancient Mesopotamia. These important finds have taught historians much about art, architecture, religion, and the daily life of Mesopotamia. Now, we read down further, but we can also click here on the blue links to get more information about Eridu, Ur, and Uruk, like so. Eridu was an ancient city in Sumer, a civilization of Mesopotamia, which is in the current-day Iraq. Eridu is considered to be the oldest city in Sumer. It was most likely founded in the 4000s BCE and inhabited until about 600 BCE. When Eridu was excavated in the middle of the 1900s, archaeologists found a series of temples. These temples were most likely built to honor the local god Enki, who was also called Ea. They also uncovered buildings made of mud and brick, which appeared to have been built on sand dunes. Eridu is Mesopotamia's oldest settlement. It was part of the Sumer region. Sumer was in the southwestern part of Mesopotamia. According to Sumerian legends, the god Enki founded Eridu. Historians in ancient Mesopotamia described Eridu as the world's first city, or the first city in the world. Today, all that remains of this ancient city are ruins near Tel Abu Shahrain in Iraq. Just northeast of Eridu, the city of Ur was another important settlement. The ruins of Ur lie about halfway between the modern city of Baghdad and the opening of the Persian Gulf in the Arabian Sea. Because of its location near the Persian Gulf, Ur controlled the flow of trade across the sea. Uruk was a third major Mesopotamian city. It was about halfway between what are now the Iraqi cities of Baghdad and Basra. It is impossible to know the exact number of people that lived in ancient Uruk, but some experts believe that by 2800 BCE, around 80,000 people lived in that city. This population, or the number of people that lived there, would have made it much larger than any other city in Mesopotamia at the time. Uruk is famous for the large wall that surrounded the city to protect it from outsiders. According to stories, King Gilgamesh had the wall built. He was the fabled hero in the Sumerian tale, the Epic of Gilgamesh. Whether or not this character was real is debatable, but many historians think that he is based on a Sumerian king who ruled Uruk around 2700 BCE. Okay, so now we're on to page 3 of Explore, Resources and Geography. What was the physical geography of Mesopotamia like? We use this first paragraph to answer number 3. The area where Mesopotamia was established is called the Fertile Crescent. The Fertile Crescent is a large plain. It begins near the eastern shores of the Mediterranean Sea and curves around to the Persian Gulf. When the Tigris and Euphrates rivers flooded this plain, as they did every spring, they brought rich soil to the valley. Now, since this was used to answer 3, we need to focus on answering number 4. What would happen to the Tigris and Euphrates rivers each spring? What was the benefit? What was the problem? So focus on that as we read this page. The Taurus and Zagros mountains bordered Mesopotamia to the north and the east. A northern Mesopotamian civilization developed in the foothills of these mountain ranges. This area was predominantly high, flat land known as a plateau. The seasonal rains, winter snow, and rivers flowing down the mountainsides to the foothills made the land very fertile. Parts of this area are still fertile enough to support agriculture today. The major cities of the Mesopotamia were located in the southern part of the country. In this region, the rivers had deposited large amounts of silt. Silt is a mixture of rock and soil that is carried by water. Over time, the silt built up and left the land in this region mostly flat and even. Each spring, the Tigris and Euphrates rivers would fill with water from melted snow in the mountains. As a result, the rivers would overflow. The flooding brought fertile soil to the region. However, the climate in the area was very hot and dry. Droughts or extended periods with little or no rainfall were common. To farm the land, the Mesopotamians had to find a way to control the flooding and capture river water to use year-round. The answer to their problem was irrigation, a method of controlling water and using it to water crops. So looking back at 4, does any of that information help you answer what would happen to the Tigris and Euphrates River each spring? What was the benefit and what was the problem? I think you can find those in this last paragraph. Okay, on to page 4 of Explore. We should have answered number 4 by now, so now number 5. What kinds of technologies did the Mesopotamians develop to control the flooding waters and bring water to the crops? So they're looking to control waters that would flood the area and bring water to crops, especially when they don't have water during dry season. Controlling the floods. How did the Mesopotamians control river floods? Think about the area where you live. Are there mountains or rivers? Is there an ocean? How do you use the water, trees, or other natural resources there? When the Mesopotamians first settled in the valley between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, they were unable to farm successfully. Without consistent water, it was impossible to grow enough crops to feed large cities. They needed to harness the water that was in the rivers, and they did it through irrigation systems. The flooding of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers every spring brought both benefits and drawbacks. The floodwaters brought fertile silt to the land, but even with this rich soil, it was still difficult to farm. Mesopotamians could not predict when the floods would occur or how high the floodwaters would reach. The flow was so unpredictable that it sometimes washed away crops or caused the river to change course. The Mesopotamians developed new technologies to control the flooding rivers and bring water to crops. They built tall embankments called levees or dikes. These walls of earth prevented the water from flooding over the banks of the rivers. The Mesopotamians also built a system of canals and ditches, so that's more technology, that would drain off the high water, helping to prevent flooding. These innovations helped to protect both crop fields and villages from flood damage. Let's get this as well. The Mesopotamians also used canals and ditches as the sources for their irrigation systems that watered their crops. They constructed dams, gates that allowed them to raise or lower the water levels in the canals and ditches. The use of dams enabled Mesopotamians to provide more water for crops when it was needed and keep water out when it was not. These innovations, combined with the rich soils deposited by floodwaters, meant that the Mesopotamians were able to grow an abundance of food, that's a lot of food, and expand their settlements without the threat of flood. So this whole section should have answered for you, these two paragraphs should have answered for you number 5. On to page 5. Agricultural innovation. So we've answered 5. Now we're looking for number 6. What is a seeder plow? Why was it helpful? So 2 questions. What is a seeder plow and why was it helpful? Mesopotamians used their irrigation systems of canals and ditches to both control the floods on the Tigris and Euphrates rivers and to bring water to their crops. With widespread irrigation, they were able to produce very high crop yields, enough to feed an entire city and then some. Yields is how much they can bring home. The Mesopotamians grew crops such as wheat, barley, melons, apples, figs, dates, and grapes. Irrigation was an important innovation that allowed these crops to flourish. The farmers of Mesopotamia also raised goats, you have some of those, sheep, and other livestock. Domestication of animals, the process of breeding animals so they can be used by people, was part of the transition that Mesopotamians made from roaming hunter-gatherers to living in farming settlements. We went over that for all of the last chapter. One of Mesopotamia's agricultural innovations was the seeder plow, so that's what number 6 was asking for. The plow blade dug a furrow or small ditch where farmers would plant the seeds. At the same time, seeds dropped down a funnel in the center of the plow and fell into the furrowed ground. The Mesopotamians made their plows out of metal, which made them stronger and longer lasting than tools made of wood. Domesticated livestock would pull the plow through the fields. The ancient Mesopotamians did not believe that they invented the cedar plow. According to legends, the plow was a gift from the god Enlil. The Mesopotamians believed that an image of a cedar plow could be seen in the stars. Like the rivers that brought life to the fields, the plow had an important place in Mesopotamian culture. So this section here should have answered for you number 6. What is a cedar plow and why was it helpful?